a country torn apart.
Когда гибнут люди, это настоящая война, к сожалению.
A cyber attack knocks out the power.
So while the operators are trying to recover, they're also dealing with the fact that all their systems are going down.
Ukraine blames the Russian government.
Ми були змушені зривати маски з російських окупантів.
And the conflict moves online.
We're waging a war against a criminal Russian government.
That's popping up.
When I reported from the front lines in eastern Ukraine for Vice, I saw firsthand the raging war between Russian-backed separatists and the Ukrainian military. Since 2013, Ukraine has been in a state of turmoil. That's when protests broke out against the pro-Russian government, which led Ukraine's president to skip the country. Then Russia invaded and annexed the Ukrainian territory of Crimea, while Russian-backed separatists started waging war in eastern Ukraine. But on December 23, 2015, a new front in the conflict may have opened up online. That day, hackers attacked 3 power companies, known as Oblenergos in western Ukraine. It's the first known cyber attack that caused outages in a nation's power grid, and it left at least 250,000 people in the dark. The city of Ivano-Frankivsk was one of the ones hit. The operators of the control center agreed to walk me through what happened that day.
This is the dispatch room, control room? Right. Thank you.
Доброго дня. Так, спочатку розглянемося, переговоримо.
Це називається мнемосхема або оперативна схема. Вона відображає реальний стан електричної мережі в нашому підприємстві. Тобто ми бачимо кожну підстанцію і зв'язки між цими підстанціями.
Bogdan Soychuk is a deputy director of the control room, which remotely controls dozens of substations around the region.
When did you realize that you were under cyber attack, that it was not just some equipment level mishap, that it was in fact some sort of attacker penetrating your network?
Спочатку прийшло розуміння те, що неправильно працює у нас телеуправління, телемеханіка. Курсор мишки починає бігати і дає команди на вимкнення вимикачами, хоча насправді ніхто не рухає ні клавіатуру, ні мишку. Ми стояли, нічого не, от, як на даний момент. Насправді курсор ось так от бігав по комп'ютеру, от на вимикач став, стоїться команда і так далі. І от, вимкнення і так далі, розумієте?
Стало зрозуміло, що відбувається якась позаштатна ситуація, і це не є якийсь збій чи програми, чи користувачів. Стало зрозуміло, що це хтось втрутився.
Vladimir Fedek is the deputy director of IT at the power company.
Було несанкціоноване захоплення управління комп'ютерною програмою, за допомогою якої відбувалося керування підстанціями.
As Vladimir and his team tried to figure out what was happening, substations controlled by the utility started shutting down one by one. It happened in the middle of the day, and as the power went out, residents had no way of knowing this wasn't a regular outage, and they were actually in the middle of a very sophisticated cyber attack.
Рішення відімкнути повністю нашу інфраструктуру від зовнішнього світу. Тобто всі канали, які були не з'єднані з інтернетом, ми всі канали фізично виключили. І логічно, і фізично були виключені.
With the grid unplugged to prevent more outages, workers at the power company realized the only way to restore power was to physically drive out to the individual substations and switch the power on manually. Yuri Torin was on duty that day.
So we're going to one of the substations that was actually attacked and taken out?
Yeah.
And did you have to physically go turn it back on?
Yes.
So there's 35,000 volts over there?
Yeah.
And if I get how close? 60 centimeters?
60 centimeters. Yeah.
Bye-bye?
Yeah, bye-bye.
So this is what you had to do in December?
Yeah, we should to open this.
And I'm gonna stay close to you. So that's the...
They switch off this equipment, they switch off that equipment. So this substation and two transformer was
Right.
without electricity.
Wow.
And this area was without
Electricity.
Yeah. Open this box and press this button.
To turn it back on.
Yeah. It's more than 25,000 people.
Wow.
And that's just from this one substation. Dozens of substations across the region went dark. The outages lasted less than a day, but it took months for the power companies to get back to normal. I also learned that at least one facility was attacked but managed to keep the lights on. And there are likely even more targets who haven't come forward to avoid embarrassment. It's clear this was a massive, coordinated effort. So who did it and why? In 2015, 2 days before Christmas, at least 3 power companies in western Ukraine were hit by a cyberattack, which knocked the power out for more than 250,000 people. The hack came in the midst of an active military conflict between the government of Ukraine and Russian-backed separatists in the east. Within 5 days of the cyberattack, the SBU, Ukraine's equivalent of the FBI, blamed Russia. After some lengthy negotiations, I met with a member of the SBU in the back of a van in Kiev, on the condition we not reveal his name or show his face. He told me that officials had advanced knowledge of the attacks, but were unable to prevent them. But the SBU hasn't offered any proof to back up its claims.
Why isn't there any direct proof that it was Russia? Why don't you have that?
Потому что в условиях гибридной войны их не может быть. С Российской Федерацией прекращены все отношения, и в данном случае они находятся, именно конкретных прямых доказательств, которые уличают конкретных лиц, могут быть собраны исключительно на телекоммуникационном оборудовании, которое находится в Российской Федерации или за ним.
Right. So this is a war. This is a full-on war with Russia. Both online, offline.
Когда гибнут люди, это настоящая война, к сожалению. Все остальное это такое поправимое. Свет отключили. Просто это используется именно как подтверждение той войны. Но, к сожалению, на то она и гибридная. Новое состояние, новое общество. Информационные угрозы являются настолько преобладающими на сегодня, что ради них готовы отключать свет, ради них готовы жертвовать людьми.
Ukraine was quick to blame Russia for the attacks, but the reality might be more nuanced. After the hack, the US government sent a team to Ukraine to investigate, and several cybersecurity firms analyzed the publicly available evidence.
There's so many things that Russia gets blamed for as a big bag boogeyman that you go, well, maybe not all of it's true, but some of it still is.
Robert M. Lee served in the Air Force as a cyber warfare operations officer. He also worked for an unnamed US intelligence agency, which he won't confirm or deny was the NSA. Rob now runs his own company focused on securing critical infrastructure. Working with electricity industry watchdogs, he co-wrote the definitive report on the Ukraine attacks.
Now, why don't you take me through the actual, in layman's terms,
Sure.
how'd this attack go down? Because it's multifaceted. There's a few different stages, right?
Yep. So it all started about 6 months previous to December, about 6 months previous. There was phishing emails sent out. So operators at the power grid were getting emails about a variety of different events going on in Ukraine. When they opened up the email, a piece of malware called Black Energy 3 was dropped to the system. That enabled the attackers to steal off credentials, usernames, passwords, things like that from the network, and then were able to come back in. Over that 6-month period, they spent that time researching and understanding the environment. So it wasn't this story that we hear sometimes thrown around about light speed, net speed, cyber attacks. No, it was human adversaries doing research in the environment. So the attack starts. When they did that, they also had a piece of malware called Kill Disk positioned on the systems, so that when the systems reboot, it would kick off deleting all the files and deleting all the systems.
Wow.
So while the operators are trying to recover, they're also dealing with the fact that all their systems are going down. And then in the midst of all that, they basically blew the bridges to those substations.
Now, let's talk about the actual people that did this attack in Ukraine. The Ukrainian government said it was Russia. So who was it? When you took a look at it, and you actually went into it, who did it?
If we're talking about should the US government come out and say it was Russia, I don't think they have enough proof.
One American cybersecurity firm, FireEye, blamed the Ukraine attack on a group they call Sandworm Team, which they say has ties to Russia. Rob agrees.
I think that the Sandworm team is more than likely a private for-hire team that goes around and kicks down the doors for places, and then it's possible that a military team or someone else comes in after. But I do not think that the Sandworm team is the Russian government.
Sandworm team may not be the Russian government, but the fact that Russia has been implicated in the attack could have international repercussions. And it seems highly unlikely that people inside the country would do something so high profile, and so obviously in Russia's interest, without at least informing the government.
I can't imagine a scenario, and this doesn't mean it can't exist, but I don't feel that there's a scenario where a team operating out of Russia thought that it was a good idea to take down a portion of the power grid and at least didn't notify somebody that they were going to do it. It's a very risky situation to be in.
The hack of Ukrainian power companies is the first time we know of that a cyber attack caused outages in a nation's power grid. If the attack was actually pulled off by Russia, this wouldn't be the first time access to electricity has been used as a weapon in this conflict. More than a year before the incident, Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine. Then some Crimeans got very pissed off and struck back. They formed a blockade and cut off access from Crimea to Ukraine. And in November 2015, they blew up pylons providing Crimea with electricity, leaving 2 million Crimeans in the dark. That happened just a month before the cyber attacks on Ukraine's power grid.
Я сейчас скажу, потому что террористы не мы. Мы учителя, бизнесмены, хлебопекари, фермеры, те, которые делали блокаду. Мы ничего ни у кого не захватывали. Мы у себя дома жили все. А Путин пришел с оружием в руках, русский солдат пришел с оружием в руках в Крым и забрал часть чужого государства, украинского государства, забрал наш дом. Поэтому мы не могли это так просто оставить.
Lanur Islyamov is a businessman and a former deputy prime minister of Crimea. He's a Tatar, a Muslim ethnic minority in Ukraine. He was a leader of the blockade, and the Russian government has charged him with terrorism in absentia. Many believe the cyber attack on Western Ukraine's power grid was Russia's retaliation for the Crimea blackout, which happened just a month earlier.
The Russian government has actually named you personally for sabotaging the Crimean power grid. How do you respond to that allegation?
Мне все равно, что думают русские и кого они обвиняют в том или в этом. Я потерял очень много активов, которые остались в России. Я потерял возможность возвращаться в Крым. Я потерял возможность видеть свою маму, собственного отца. Это огромная потеря для нас. Она невозможно даже оценить, эту потерю. Пусть русские теряют тоже что-то. Они должны привыкнуть к тому, что они будут терять каждый день еще больше того, что они потеряли от энергоблокады.
Do you think the FSB is following you?
А сейчас они не просто следят, они подключаются к моему телефону, они мониторят мои передвижения, они очень интересуются тем, где я могу находиться. Я не нахожусь больше 2-3 дней в одном месте, чтобы вы понимали. Я тоже предпринял определенные шаги, и они всячески интересуются там, где можно меня задержать, каким-то образом, чтобы они меня похитили или убили.
So do you personally think that the attack on the Obanergos in December in Ukraine was retaliation for the attack on the power grid in Crimea?
Абсолютно. Это звенья одной цепи, конечно. Это так. То, что произошла блокада энергетическая, и то, что они ответили хакерской атакой, это абсолютно две вещи даже для меня непонятные.
Do you think you'll ever go back to Crimea?
Абсолютно. Мы вернемся в Крым. Даже сомнений быть не может. Вы знаете, в Крым возвращаются все крымские татары. Рано или поздно. Мы вернемся или на щите, или с щитом.
So you're going back to Crimea dead or alive, is what you're saying?
I think so, okay. Поэтому никто не вправе ее отнимать. Поэтому это наша земля. И мы там будем хозяевами. И это факт неоспоримый.
The Russians may have been the first to take the conflict in Ukraine online, but the battles being fought there are continuing from both sides. Roman Burko and Vitalik Sororin, not the real names, are part of a group called Inform-Napalm.
Так би мовити, ми стали на передньому фронті інформаційної війни одразу після вторгнення Російської Федерації в Україну. Нам довелося вести свою війну проти цієї країни, тому що ми бачили, як державні структури не справляються з цією ситуацією. Ми були змушені зривати маски з російських окупантів.
Many of their members live in Crimea or in separatist-controlled regions in eastern Ukraine. Officially, the Russian military is not deployed in the east, but using a mixture of social media and on-the-ground intel gathering, Inform-Napalm is proving Russian special forces are actively operating in the region. They've also published information about Russian soldiers serving in Syria. They agreed to meet me in my hotel and wore masks because they worry about what could happen to their family members and loved ones if their identities were ever revealed to Russian agents.
So what is Inform-Napalm and what do you guys do?
Inform-Напалм – це міжнародна волонтерська спільнота, яка була утворена на початку березня 2014 року. Вона утворилася з людей, які побачили цю агресію одразу, побачили, що за тим, що Росія намагається. Тому ми займаємося не тільки розвідкою відкритих джерел, тобто збираємо інформацію про російських солдат, збираємо розвідувальні дані, яким створюємо певні перешкоди як для російських дій, виставляти конкретні назви підрозділів, конкретні прізвища тих, хто окупував нашу землю, нашу територію. 2016 рік все змінив. З'явилися угруповання, інформаційні кіберугруповання, які стали на сторону України. Це Falcons Flame, Trinity, Рух 8 тощо. Проте зараз ці угруповання починають об'єднуватись і розуміють, що потрібно відповідати потужніше, спільною складовою, як рій бджіл, який нападає на ведмедя, який починає лізти не в свої діла.
So this is more than just an info war between Ukraine and Russia. This is essentially a cyber war as well.
Так, ми переходимо у стадію кібервійни. Можливо, це перша кібервійна світова, яка розпочнеться у 2016 році. Я думаю, ми її виграємо.
You're behind a keyboard and you're causing havoc for the Russian government. But are you willing to die for that cause?
В принципе, если нужно будет, пойдем в окопы, научимся. Но еще это не время, есть кому в окопах сидеть. А мы пока что побудем за клавиатурой.
Russia never formally responded to Ukraine's allegation that the country is to blame for the cyber attack on Ukraine's power grid. And some government officials within Russia really don't take the threats from Ukrainian hackers very seriously.
Я не вижу смысла на что-либо, на вот эти вот уколы отвечать. Ну, то есть, вы представляете себе, вот ты встречаешь профессионала, бойца по смешанным единоборствам, да? Ну, я, допустим, боец по смешанным единоборствам. И ко мне подходит какой-то мальчик, да? Ну, может быть, он немножко под шафой, или там что-то у него настроение плохое, или там женщина его бросила. И он подходит, тебе начинает грубить. Сразу бить его? Или там как-то отвечать зачем? Надо объяснить человеку, что не надо. Нам зачем конфликтовать? Во-первых, потому что я сильнее во всех отношениях.
Vadim Dengin is a member of the Russian parliament and the Committee on Informational Policy, Information Technology and Communications.
Если против России будете наносить дальше, продолжать, значит, будете получать ответную реакцию. И этот адекватный ответ может быть миллион раз сильнее, чем то, что развязывается, и это должны понимать те, кто это организовывает.
The Russian government maintains it never invaded Ukraine, and that Russian soldiers in eastern Ukraine are merely patriotic volunteers helping Ukrainians who want to separate from the country and join Russia.
Мы стараемся не принимать никакого участия в конфликте, нас постоянно пытаются затащить туда. Но мы соседи, и мы не стараемся создать этот конфликт, мы стараемся вообще уходить от этого всего.
Dengin might think ragtag Ukrainian hackers are harmless, but the hackers I'm about to talk to are the exact guys who, in collaboration with Inform-Napalm, hacked the Kremlin and leaked the emails of Putin's right-hand man, Vladislav Surkov, making international headlines.
So right now I'm waiting to meet up with a hacking group that Inform-Napalm hooked us up with called Ruhate. And I don't know what these people look like, but I do know they're under investigation apparently, allegedly, by Russian intelligence because they've been hacking Russia. But we should be meeting with them really soon.
We finally managed to figure out a safe location for the two Black Hat hackers I was about to meet. They call themselves Dahmer and Ross. They're part of the hacking group Ruhate and say Russian intelligence agencies like the FSB would be very interested in knowing who they are.
So if you could say anything to those Russian FSB investigators, what would you tell them?
You can go and yourself like Captain Kangaroo. Yes,
You're an outlaw, eh? So you have evidence then that they're actually after you?
Yep.
And you don't give a
Why should I? I'm on my ground, I'm on my soil, I'm in my country, protecting my country.
But if they invade at some point?
We should fight back. It's the war.
This is war, so this is all war to you?
Yep. It is a war. Not using the direct shot fires and guns, but we're using the codes, the exploits, keyboards and other stuff, but it's still a war. We are not waging a war against the civilian, Russian civilian. We're waging a war against the criminal Russian government.
Do you want to explain some of the biggest hacks that Ruhate has ever done?
Ну, я же уже перечислял. Взломали Государственную Думу Российской Федерации, взломали несколько областей. Сейчас вместе это с Falcons Flames, с Trinity, с Inform Napalm вытащили огромное количество документов, писем, обмениваемся информацией. Я думаю, что после того, как мы научимся пользоваться методами это друг друга, то тогда, ну, то есть я думаю, что самые лучшие взломы будут еще впереди.
The conflict in Ukraine is almost 3 years old and counting. As I know from my own experience, getting shot at or being shelled is a daily occurrence in certain parts of the country. But if Russia really was behind the power grid attacks in western Ukraine, or even if Russia just allowed a private company to do it, a major line has been crossed. Our critical infrastructure in the US and Canada is just as vulnerable to cyber threats as Ukraine's. So if someone really wanted to turn the lights off in North America, they probably could. And given that there have been no serious repercussions for what happened in Ukraine, what's really stopping someone from doing it again?